Okay, in Chapter 3, Section 3, we're going to be completing the square. So again, we're just continuing to solve quadratics just like we did in 3.2, 3.1, and factoring. It's all the same thing. The first type of quadratic we're going to look at is a method when one side of our equation is a perfect square trinomial and the other side is a constant. So if we look at our example here, this x squared minus 16x plus 64 is a perfect square trinomial because it is x minus 8 squared FOILed out. So we see that the square root of 64 is 8, and then 8 minus 8, or negative 8 minus 8 would be negative 16. So this is a perfect square trinomial. And if we notice, the right side of our equation is also a perfect square. So what do you think we can do to solve this equation here? We have two perfect squares. Casey, what do?
We can square root both sides.
We take the square root of both sides. So on the left side, we just have x minus 8, and on the right side, we get plus or minus 10.
Miss Carver?
Yep. All right, what do we do next? Anybody?
Subtract the 8.
We would have to add 8 to both sides, but we want to split our equation up in two so we can see that we are accounting for the positive 10 and the negative 10. So we have x minus 8 is equal to 10, and x minus 8 is equal to negative 10. And now we add 8 to both sides, so we get x is equal to 18. And again, we add 8 to both sides, and x is equal to negative 2. So our two solutions here are x is equal to 18 and x is equal to negative 2. So let's look at number 1. We need to solve the equation using square roots. So we have a perfect square trinomial on the left. What does this factor into? X plus 2. We can see that 2 factors of 4 are 2 and 2, and they add up to 4. So if we were to factor this out, just like how we were doing before, it's nothing new. We would have x plus 2, which is the same thing as x plus 2 squared. We have it twice, so we can just write x plus 2 squared. And it's equal to 36. Now we have a perfect square on the left and a perfect square on the right. What can we do? Square root both sides. So we have x plus 2 is equal to, what's the square root of 36? Plus or minus 6. We have to make sure we include the plus or minus. So now we're going to split it up into two equations. We have x plus 2 is equal to positive 6, and x plus 2 is equal to negative 6. We just solve for x, so we subtract 2 on both sides. So you get x is equal to 4, and x is equal to negative 8. All right, let's look at number 2. So what are 2 factors of 9 that add to negative 6?
Negative 3.
Negative 3. And negative 3. So again here, we're going to have a perfect square. So we have x minus 3 squared is equal to 1. We have a perfect square on the left and a perfect square on the right. What can we do? Take the square root of both sides. So you have x minus 3. What's the square root of 1?
1.
Just 1? Plus or minus 1. Can't forget that plus or minus. So we split it up into our two equations. X minus 3 is equal to 1. X minus 3 is equal to negative 1. Solve for x. So we add 3 on both sides. X is equal to 4. X is equal to 2. Any questions here? Alright, let's look at number 3. What are two factors of 121 that add up to negative 22?
Negative 11.
Negative 11, negative 11. So again, we're going to have a perfect square. X minus 11 squared is equal to 81. What do we do? What's next?
We square both sides.
Take the square root of both sides. So x minus 11 is equal to what?
9.
Plus or minus 9.
Oh, yeah.
We split it up into two equations, so x minus 11 is equal to 9, and x minus 11 is equal to negative 9. Solve for x, add 11 to both sides, so x is equal to 20. Add 11 to both sides, x is equal to 2. So our b is 14, so we're going to do 14 over 2 squared. What's 14 over 2? 7 squared, and 7 squared? 49. So our c is 49. So our perfect square trinomial is x squared plus 14x plus 49. Now we need to write this as the square of a binomial. What are two factors of 49 that adds 14? 7 and 7. So our perfect square binomial is x plus 7 squared. So we had to add 49 here to make this a perfect square trinomial. Your number in the binomial, so this number here, is always going to come from the number before you square it. Let's do some more practice. So number 4. We're doing the same thing. We have to find our value for c that makes this a perfect square trinomial, and then put it into our perfect square binomial. So again, we plug it into our formula, b over 2 squared. What's our b?
8.
8, so 8 over 2 squared. That would make this 4 squared, which is 16. So we need to add 16 to this equation to make it a perfect square. So we have x squared plus 8x plus 16. What would our perfect square binomial be?
X to the second power 8x plus 4.
So it's just this part, what's in parentheses. What goes inside of our parentheses here?
Plus 4.
Plus 4. So x plus 4 squared. So remember, we get that 4 from here. Any questions? All right, number 5. So we need to find our value for c that makes this a perfect square trinomial. So we have b over 2 squared. What's our b? Negative 2 over 2 squared. Negative 2 over 2 is negative 1 squared, which is just positive 1. So our perfect square trinomial is x squared minus 2x plus 1. What is our perfect square binomial? X minus 1. So it's important that we keep this b, the negative b, even though we square it so it becomes positive, but we have to make sure we have that minus 1 inside of our parentheses because that's how we get the negative in our original equation. All right, number 6. So our formula is b over 2 squared. What's our b?
Negative 9.
Negative 9 over 2 squared. What is negative 9 over 2? Negative 4.5. We could just leave it as negative 9 over 2 if we wanted to leave it as a fraction. Which it's probably easier to leave it as a fraction when we square it, because this would just be 81 over 4. So our perfect square trinomial would be x squared minus 9x plus 81 over 4. What is our binomial? X minus 4.5. So again, we could say minus 9 over 2 or minus 4.5, same thing, but it's super important that we keep that negative with it. Now we are completing the square and solving our equation. So before we were just pulling up a number out of nowhere for c. We're going to do the same thing. We're adding that number to our equation, but we need to keep our equation balanced. We can't just pull out a number from anywhere to be in our equation. So if we add a number on the right side of our equation, we have to make sure we add it to the left side to keep our equation balanced. So here, when you complete the square of a solution of solving an equation, you must add the same number to both sides of the equation. So it has to be added to both sides of the equation. So we're doing the same thing. Solve x squared minus 10x plus 7 is equal to 0 by completing the square. So what number, how do we find that number that will help us complete the square? What was that little thing that we did? B over 2 squared. What's our b here? Negative 10. What is negative 10 over 2? Negative 5. And negative 5 squared is 25. So we need to add 5 to our, or we need to add 25 to our equation. So we have x squared minus 10x plus 7 is equal to 0. I'm adding 25 here to help us complete the square. If I add 25 on the left side, I have to add 25 to the right side. So now I'm just looking at this part here for our perfect square trinomial. I'm actually going to move the plus 7 to the other side of the equation. So how do I get rid of that plus 7 and move it to the other side? We subtract 7 on both sides. So that gets rid of that. Now I can write our perfect square trinomial as our binomial squared. So what would this be squared? Anybody? Whoop. X minus 5. Remember, we get that number from our parentheses here. So we just put that x minus 5 is equal to, and then we need to do 25 minus 7 because that's everything that we have on our right side of the equation, which would be 18. Now how do we solve from here? Square root both sides. So we have x minus 5 is equal to plus or minus square root 18. Can we simplify the square root of 18? Perfect, 3 square root 2. So same thing we did before where we split up the equation. We have x minus 5 is equal to the positive 3 square root 2. And x minus 5 is equal to the negative 3 square root 2. And then I just add 5 to both sides. So I have x is equal to 5 plus 3 square root 2. And x is equal to 5 minus 3 square root 2. So these are two solutions here. Which if we wanted to, you could just write it as x is equal to 5 plus or minus 3 square root 2. So this is just the consolidated form of our two solutions. All right, number 7. So we need to solve the equation by completing the square. How do we find a number that we need to throw in here to complete the square? What's that formula?
B over 2 squared.
B over 2 squared. What's our B?
Negative 4.
Negative 4 over 2 squared, which is negative 2 squared, which is 4. So we are adding 4 to the right side of our equation here, or the left side, so we need to add 4 to the right side also. So our equation now becomes x squared minus 4x plus 8 is equal to 0. And I'm adding 4 in here, and I'm adding 4 to the right side too, just so we keep our equation balanced. So we have to keep our equation balanced. Now with our trinomial here, it's a perfect square. So we can write it as our binomial squared. What goes inside of our parentheses?
Negative 2.
X minus 2. Perfect. So we get that minus 2 from our parentheses up there. We need to move our 8 to the other side, so this is equal to some number. How do we get our 8 to the other side of the equation?
Subtract.
Subtract 8. So we have 4 minus 8, which is negative 4. What do we do to solve here? Take the square root of both sides. So we have x minus 2 on the left. What do we get on the right? Plus or minus square root of negative 4. Can we simplify the square root of negative 4? We simplify it to 2i. Perfect. So we have x minus 2 is equal to plus or minus 2i. So we add 2 to both sides of our equation. So we get 2 plus or minus 2i. That's our final answer. All right, we have one last example. Let's look at 8. What do we do first? Where do we need to start?
B over 2 squared.
Perfect. B over 2 squared. What's our B?
8.
So 8 over 2 squared, which is 4 squared, which is 16. So we have x squared plus 8x minus 5 is equal to 0. And I'm adding 16 here. So I need to add 16 to the right side also. Now we have a perfect square trinomial here. What is our binomial going to be? What goes inside of our parentheses?
Positive 4.
X plus 4. And what's that going to be equal to?
$21.
Awesome. We need to add 5 to both sides to get that 5 to the other side. So 16 plus 5 is 21. Now what do we do to solve? Take the square root of both sides, so we get x plus 4 is equal to plus or minus square root 21. Can we simplify the square root of 21?
No.
Nope. So we can just leave it like that. Then we are going to subtract 4 on both sides, so x is equal to negative 4 plus or minus the square root of 21.